All right, good morning, everyone, and thanks for tuning in. Rob here from the DAE, and we're going to be working on another TinkerCAD project this morning. Just before we get started, if you hear a little bit of banging in the background, that's just the gym above us. I think they're throwing some medicine balls on the floor. So it is what it is. Hopefully you don't hear that. But if you do, no worries. Try to ignore it. It won't last forever. But anyway, let's go ahead and get started and talk a little bit about the project that we're going to be working on today. So the past couple of projects we've worked on have been the name tag and the castle design. And both of those, while the name tag was functional, they were very simple and didn't require any sort of precise measurements, within reason. And the castle was strictly a model, so the scale and size of it didn't make a difference at all. It was really more about proportion and aesthetic. Today we're going to be designing an object with function, and I'm choosing one specifically because I have a need for it. But the process we're going to follow can be applied to anything. We just have to think a little bit about what the function of the object is and how we're going to design it, and then get started in creating it. And I have a little bit of an idea in mind of how I'm going to create this object, but not entirely. So I'm going to be playing with a couple of different designs as we go. I may need to scrap some ideas and start over, but that's fine. That's part of the design process. You're never going to get anything right on the first try. So we're just going to jump right into it. So I have at home a monitor hanger clamp kind of thing for a computer monitor like this. I actually have a monitor sitting on my desk, and I have a taller one of these with a monitor above it. And what I'd like to do is design a clamp that will fit on this cylinder that I can hang a set of headphones from. So basically, when I'm not using my studio headphones, I can hang them on this, and they're kind of tucked behind my monitor and out of the way. I've got a pretty good idea of what the design's going to look like. What I think I'm going to do is basically have two halves that fit together and screw together, and just have a hook coming off of them. I'm going to sketch out a little bit of an idea of what I have in mind shortly. I could also make something like the mechanism on the top here, which has a hinge and then a bolt. I think I'm going to just do it in two pieces just for simplicity's sake. I think we'll probably do something with a hinge in the future. But for now, we're going to keep it simple and just do the two halves that bolt together. But before we even get into sketching this, I want to quickly just take the dimensions of this cylinder so we know, what scale to work with. We are modeling for a specific purpose, so we do need to measure and figure out what our dimensions are. So it fits properly, otherwise things won't fit. So to measure, I've got a set of calipers. This caliper is a digital caliper, but you can see it doesn't have a battery in it, so I won't get a super precise reading, which honestly doesn't make that much of a difference for this project. We can be sort of good enough. And quite honestly, if you measure with absolutely no tolerance and it's fit 100% tight to the diameter of this cylinder, when it 3D prints, it's probably not going to fit properly because the plastic expands and shrinks and all that stuff. So you always want to model with a little bit of extra tolerance to make sure things fit properly. So the fact that this doesn't work doesn't make a difference. So I'm just going to measure this and get an approximate measure, and it looks like it's 35 millimeters exactly. So we're just going to go with 35 millimeters. There's a little analog reading on this. We're going to go with 35 millimeters as our dimension. And I think that should be good enough. So I'm just going to jot that down, and I'm going to put this down, and then we can get started in designing this. So I just have a piece of paper and a pencil to jot down some notes. So 35 millimeters is our diameter. What I think I'm going to do, I'm going to quickly sketch kind of a top-down view of what I think this is going to look like. And I'll show you what I think we're going to design this as. And then kind of make a hook off of this. Okay, so basically what I think we're going to do, and I hope you can see this, but we're going to have this center cylinder, and pardon my terrible sketch, but I just want to show you what I think I'm going to do for the design. The center cylinder is the cylinder on the actual clamp, and then what we're basically going to do is make two halves that look like this, and then we'll be able to put bolts through them and screw them together. I think I'm going to design it in a way where the nut that the bolt would go through would sit flush inside of this, so we'll kind of have to figure that out as we go. And then somewhere on this there'll be some hook coming off. I have no idea how I want that to look. I'm going to really focus on getting the clamp part done first, and then we'll figure out how we want to design the hook. I'm probably going to make it really, really simple, but we'll figure it out when we get to it. So for the time being, let's start modeling this piece and then we'll go from there. Hopefully you can see that. If not, you'll see it as I start to create it. So I'm just going to keep that paper handy in case I want to jot down any notes. So I've got a new TinkerCAD project open. Of course, the first thing I'm going to do is name it. So I'm going to call this Rob Headphone Clamp. Okay. And what I'm going to do at first is I'm going to create an object that represents the cylinder of the mount for the monitor. So we'll bring a cylinder out, and I'm going to just set this to 35 by 35. So this is the dimension of the cylinder in that clamp mechanism. We're going to use this as negative space. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to scale this up by 1 millimeter just to give us a little bit of room. If we model our clamp where the space in the center that fits around the cylinder is exactly 35 millimeters, when we print it, it may shrink a little bit and it may not fit. So I'm going to model it with 1 millimeter of tolerance here, and hopefully that will be good enough. We'll have to figure it out when we print it. So that's fine. And right now the height of this is 20 millimeters, which, just to show you the scale, is about that much space. I'm actually going to make it a little bit taller. I think I'm going to make it 40 millimeters, so it's going to be a little bit beefier looking. Yeah, I think that sounds good. We'll make it 40 millimeters in height. So this will basically be the dimension of my clamp. So perfect. So this is we're actually going to set this as a hole. This is going to be the negative space because this is the dimension of the cylinder and the clamp mechanism that we're going to fit around. So we've got that set up as a whole. Then the other thing we have to figure out before we move on is how thick we want the clamp to be. I don't really know. I'm going to have to take a look when we model it, and I'll kind of talk you through the process as we go. Again, I have an idea of the design, but I'm really flying by the seat of my pants of how I actually am going to build this. I'm not entirely sure, so I'm going to have to experiment with a few things and we'll see. So we're going to bring another cylinder out, and we'll make the height of this 40 right away because we know that that's the height that we want. This is going to be the actual outside of the clamp. So if this was 36 by 36, I think I'd like the thickness of my clamp to be around 5 millimeters, which is about this much. So we're basically going to have to add 5 millimeters all around. So it's actually going to come out to be 10 millimeters. So if this is 36 by 36, we're going to make this 46 by 46. And basically what we need to do now is cut the hole out of this cylinder. So we're going to align them using our alignment tool. Oops, I do that sometimes. All right, so these are all aligned. If I group this together, I now have a ring. And the inner empty space of this ring, the inner diameter of that empty space, should fit properly around our clamp. Again, should fit properly around this cylinder in our clamp mechanism. Okay, so we've got a ring. That looks pretty good. Now, again, with my design, I need to make some fins kind of coming off of the side, because I'm going to put the hardware that bolts this together through those two fins. Again, I could probably do a hinge on one side and just a single bolt, but I think just for simplicity's sake, we're going to make this a simple design, and we'll get into doing some hinge designs later on. So what we'll do now is we're going to bring out a box, and we'll figure out what dimensions we need this to be, and this will be the section that the hardware goes through. So I think we want the length of this fin going in this direction to be large enough to accommodate. I'm going to be using metric hardware. I have an M6 nut that I want to use, a nut and bolt. An M6 nut is 10 millimeters, so we need, and I want that to fit flush in the side of this, and I'll show you what that means shortly, but we need to accommodate something around this size, so we need to make this slightly larger. So I think we can probably make these fins, I think 20 millimeters should be fine. So 20 millimeters in this direction. So we want this length to be 20 millimeters. And then we have to figure out what we want this length to be, right? So I think we can probably make that 10, because the thickness of our tube all around here is 5 millimeters. And this is going to get split in half, which I'll show you shortly what that's going to look like. So we're going to make this 10, so each side is 5, right? And that should work pretty well. And then lastly, I'll need to make the height of this correct. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to align these together, and then I'm going to actually bump this over using the arrow keys so it's sitting flush within my object. Okay, and now we'll simply duplicate this and just bump that over, and again have it sitting flush within my object. So we're going to group this together, and now we've got this ring with some fins on the side, which is pretty good. I think what I'm going to do at this point is split this in half, because we really need this to be 2 halves that will kind of clamp together around the cylinder, kind of like that. So I'm going to split this in half, and then we'll start to work on putting the spots for the nut and the bolts. So let's see. What I'm going to do to split this is I'm going to use a box. I'll use the box object that's already set up as a hole. And right off the bat, I know I need to scale the height of this to 40 because that's the height of my object. What I need to figure out is what size I should split this in half with so it still sits pretty flush. You know, we can probably get away with 1 millimeter because 1 millimeter is basically this much, and that's how much space will be through it. I'm going to go ahead and use 1 millimeter. I could probably also do a 1/2 millimeter, and that would work. But let's do 1 millimeter, and that's basically what we're going to use to cut this in half. And then what I'll need to do is make the length of this really large so it goes all the way through the object. So I'm just going to kind of move this over here, and then we'll use the alignment tool to line this up along the center line. And now I've basically got my whole object running down the length of this clamp. So that's pretty good. I think we can group this together now. And now I basically have 2 halves of a clamp, right? I have 2 halves. And keep in mind that even though there's a little bit of space when we put the bolts in them, those little wings on the side will kind of flex together because the material is kind of flexible. I think it should hold regardless. I think that's fine. A 1/2 millimeter might have been better for the space in between, but let's just go with 1 millimeter, and we'll, you know, when we print it, we'll see what it looks like. So this is looking pretty good. This is looking pretty good. It's probably, there probably is a simpler design out there, but you know, I just wanted to make some simple clamp mechanism. I think this will work nicely. So now we need to figure out how the hardware is going to go through this. And there's a couple of different ways to do this. One thing I can do is I can use a bolt with a hex head and then make a hole that's hexagonal, and the bolt will sit flush in the side. And then we can use like a hand wing nut to clamp that on. But I don't think this is going to be something we're going to be taking on and off very frequently. So I think what I'd like to do is make a hole in one of these wings that a nut will fit in, and then we can put like a Phillips head bolt through it. And then that way we don't need to use a wrench to tighten it. The nut will sit flush into the side of it, and we'll see what that looks like. So, okay. That works. So let's do that. So we're just going to pick a side where the nut's going to go. I'm going to put it on this side, and we're going to start on one wing, and then we'll move it over, and we'll see what this looks like. So we're going to need a cylinder object. We've got a polygon object here. So first things first, let's get the work plane tool going, and then we're going to pop this polygon object here. Now, I had looked this up earlier, and I know the dimension of a M6 nut is it's 10 millimeters. So if we do 10, no, that's not right, 10 by 10. So that is approximately the size of an M6 nut. Now keep in mind, we mentioned this earlier, we might want to model this with a little bit of extra space. So what I think I'm going to do is, I think we're going to do 10.5 and 10.5. That should be enough. Whoop, that's not 10.5, 10.5 by 10.5. That way there's just a little extra room, because if we print this an even 10 by 10, it probably will shrink slightly, and that means that the nut won't actually fit in. By adding a little bit of tolerance, that should work pretty well. So, nice. Now, I'm going to put the work plane back down. One thing I probably should have done, because I'm going to have some issues aligning this, is I should have set this up on the fin before grouping everything, because then I'd be able to align this center to just this piece. Whereas if I use the alignment tool now, because this is all grouped together, it's going to align towards the middle of the clamp. But that's okay. I think we can kind of eyeball the left to right alignment. What I do need to do is align it top to bottom, and we'll be able to use the alignment tool to do that. So basically that now will be aligned properly with the midpoint from top to bottom. So let's just zoom in a little bit here and kind of move this object over to where we think it looks pretty good. I think that's going to be fine. I think that's going to give it, actually let's go back over to the right a little bit. I think that's going to give plenty of material on either side to support the nut. So that's great. So what we're going to do now is we're going to move this object inward the depth of the nut. And actually, I don't know off the top of my head the depth of an M6 nut, so I'm going to say M6 nut dimensions in Google, and I think I should be able to find the same resource I was looking at. So this is great. It gives me all of the different dimensions of various metric nuts. So I need the thickness in M, and I'm using an M6. So it says that the thickness is 5 millimeters. Okay. Between 4.9 and 5.2. Now that might be a little bit of a problem, because if I'm not mistaken, the dimension of this fin here is actually 5 millimeters. So if we were to move this 5 millimeters in, it would actually run all the way through, and we don't want to do that. So I could ungroup this and make this thicker, but what I actually think I'm going to do is move this 4 millimeters in, and the nut will just stick out slightly. And it really won't be a big deal. I think it should be fine. I probably should have figured out what the depth of the nut was before I started modeling this, so that I could have made these wings thick enough to accommodate having the nut sit totally flush. But so be it. This is what happens when you don't go in with a proper plan, which is fine. And we'll 3D print this, and if it doesn't work, I can always go back and ungroup this and make the changes. So we're going to make this a hole, and before we group this, what we're going to do is duplicate it, and then we're going to bump it over to the other side, and all we're going to do is, again, eyeball the alignment of it so it looks pretty good. I think that looks about the same. So now if I group this together, I have these beautiful little flush holes for nuts to fit in. So basically you'd be able to fit a nut in there, and then when we thread our bolt through it, it will not require anything to hold the nut in place. If these weren't here, you'd need a wrench and a screwdriver to hold the nut in place and tighten the screw. We won't need to do that because of these nicely designed recesses, which is great. So what we're going to do next is put the hole through the center of this. Now, I don't know the dimensions of an M6 bolt. Again, I should have looked that up before. But we're going to be able to figure that out, no problem. So let's put in M6 bolt diameter. And if we have that, let's see. So it looks like 6 millimeters. Indicates the M6 res. Okay, right? So that's what M6 means. I should have known that. That's just me being dopey, but that's fine. So we basically need to make a 6 millimeter hole through the center of this. So what we'll do is we will grab our work plane tool and set this up right over here. And then we will, actually, you know what? I'm gonna backtrack for a second. I have a really, really good idea. I'm gonna ungroup this. And what we're gonna do is we're going to put the cylinder that will be the hole centered on this object, so that we know for a fact that the hole will be centered on the nut. Sorry if that doesn't make sense. I'll show you exactly what I mean. So I'm going to pop the work plane tool here, and I'm going to bring out a cylinder object here and another one here, and I'm going to scale them to 6 millimeters because we're using M6 hardware. Okay, and same thing here. Okay, and then I can put the work plane back, and I want to select these two objects, and I want to align them centered on each other, just like that. And it did move them, but it's fine. We're going to be okay we'll be okay to set this up all aligned again. We will use our alignment tool again. It won't be a problem. So we'll set this like this and like this. Very good. So now what I'm going to do is actually make the length of this long enough to go all the way through. And same thing here. And it doesn't matter what it is, as long as it goes all the way through. And now we're going to group these two holes together. And same thing here. We're going to group these two holes together. So now we basically have a hole that is our little recessed nut. In addition to that, we have our hole going all the way through for the M6 bolt. So now the last thing we're going to do is select this and oops, that's not what I wanted to do. I want to select these and align them, which we will do with the height, which actually didn't change, which is cool. This one did. This one didn't. Peculiar. All right, let's group this. Let's align this one. There we are. And we're just going to make sure. Oh, so it did move side to side slightly. Let's see. I think that might be too much. No, that's it. I think that's it. Looks pretty good. Let's move it over one just to see. Take a quick look on this side. I think it's actually over one more. All right, so now if we group this together, we have our nicely countersunk holes for our nuts and the holes going through the other side for our M6 hardware. I don't know about you, but that looks like a pretty good clamp. I think that's going to work. I think that's going to work. Very nice. Very nice. Okay, cool. If I'm not mistaken, I think our clamp is done, and now we can start figuring out some kind of hook mechanism on this. And I'm not exactly sure what that's going to look like. We may want to Google image search some things to get some inspiration, but the other thing that would be nice is if I had the headphone so I know how long to make the hook coming off of this clamp. I don't. I'm going to sort of take a guess because I know approximately it's probably about 50 millimeters, the band across the top. I have a set of like recording studio headphones with the larger band. So we'll make the hook probably about 65 or 70 millimeters in length just to make sure that we have enough space to accommodate them. So I think we will put the hook coming off of this side. That works pretty well. I think what I'll probably do is design the hook separately and align it and position it after the fact. I think I'd like the hook to be kind of flat and wide. I think flat so that the headphones kind of sit on there, and I think maybe we'll have the hook come out and kind of angle up at the end so they don't slip off. So I'm kind of thinking maybe sort of a straight flat bit and then a little angled bit up at the top. From a design perspective, I'm really not sure what I want this to look like. I think what I'm going to do is probably use a cylinder and then use a box to flatten out the top of part of the cylinder. I could also use the round roof object. That would probably work pretty well as well, but I don't know. I don't really know. I'm gonna just start and see what happens. So I'll bring out a cylinder. I probably want that cylinder to be, you know, if we said I think about 30. I'm just taking a guess too. I really should have the headphones here to measure, but I think about 30 millimeters works pretty well. So let's just scale this up 30 by 30. And then what I'm going to do actually is, well, I'll build it vertically and we'll rotate it vertically. That's fine. So we said we wanted the length of this to be, we said probably around 65 or 70 millimeters. I'm going to start with 65 and see what it looks like. Okay, I think that works pretty well. We'll have to see. You know, it really depends on when we print this. Oops, that's not what I wanted to do. I want to just move this over here for now. So, all right, so what I'm going to do is rotate this 90 degrees, right? And then let's just set this down on the build platform to 0. So it's just sitting on the build platform. So I think what I would like to do is sort of flatten out the top part of this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my work plane tool and I'm going to grab a box object. And I'm going to just kind of place it arbitrarily here before. We know that the dimensions of our cylinder are 30 by 30, so I'm going to make the width of this object 30 as well. And I'm just going to quickly align it, and then we'll figure out the rest of how this is going to work. Again, I don't really have much of a plan here. I'm really kind of flying by the seat of my pants. So I think I'd like to bring this up. Well, I think let's bring it up to 15 or 16. Let's try this. So I really could have used the round roof object. Yeah, I don't know. I don't really know what I'm doing, so bear with me. We're going to figure this out. So I'm basically using the square to cut off part of this circle. So we have a flat bit here. Group that together. And we've got ourselves the beginning of a hook, right? I think this is entirely too wide. I think I'm going to scale this down to 20. I don't think it needs to be that wide. I also think we can make this a little bit 20, 180, and the height's, all right, let's make it 20. All right, cool. I think that's better. Let's see what that looks like. Okay, I think that looks a little bit nicer. Okay, so I think what we'll do now is we're going to put some little angled piece at the end to hold the headphones in place. I think maybe I can use a round roof object that's angled up slightly. I'm not entirely sure. The other thing that would also be really nice would be to round off these edges. Maybe we'll do that. Maybe we'll round off the edges slightly. I'm not entirely sure how I'm going to do that, but well, let's figure it out. So I think what I'm going to do to round these edges off is, let's ungroup this for a minute. I think what I'm going to do, I'm going to move the hole off to the side for a second. No, maybe not. I'm just going to move this out of the way for a minute. Okay, just realign these. I'm second guessing myself here, I'm sorry. Let's regroup this together. All right, I think I know what I'm doing. I think I have an idea. So I think what we'll do to round off these edges is let's see. Well, let's see what happens. I'm going to try and grab a cylinder object, and I'm going to make it like 1 by 1. I'm going to make this really small, right? And then I'm basically going to let's get the work plane out of here. I'm going to basically try and line this up to the edge here. And let's see what this looks like. I made the length of this 65, I think, so we'll make the length of this 65, and then we can align them. Alright, this is, I thought I made this 65. 65, this one is 60, okay. Alright, we can align this again. Okay. That's kind of getting there. Should be able to duplicate this. I'll bump this over. Let's see. Okay. Pretty good. Group this together. Okay. It's looking a little nicer. I could probably bump those in a little bit, but you know what? That's cool. I think I'll go with that. Now we need to make our angled piece off of the top here. And I think what I'm going to do is use the round roof object and just change the angle of it, and we'll see what that looks like. So we bring our round roof object here, and I need to flip it over 180 degrees for now. I think I'm going to make the length of this pretty short. I think I'm going to make it 10. And the height of it, what's the height of this object? It's like 9, so we can make this 9. And then I'm going to probably want to round off those edges too, but we'll do that shortly. Okay. And then what I'm going to do is, let's align them. We'll use our alignment tool to get this all lined up. And then I think what we'll do is set the angle of this to maybe something like that. Okay. Now, basically, I want to let's see, let's move this up a little bit so we can get this like flush. Let's see how that's going to look. Maybe I want to make it a little smaller in this direction, like 18, so it sits a little bit more flush with everything. Okay. That's not bad. I do have this stupid like bit of material sticking out here. I'm not entirely sure. I'm not entirely sure that I like that. Let's make it 19. Oops, that's 18 again. And align this and see if this works. Keep in mind, I am no engineer. I am a hobbyist. So I don't know exactly what I'm doing. All right. Okay, so that's okay. You know, I have another idea of what might look a little bit better. I'm going to just delete this. I think I'm going to try and use a sphere and give it a rounded edge and see what that looks like. See how that sits much more nicely flush with this? That might be a better way to go. I probably will scale it down slightly, but that might be a better way to go. I think that looks a little bit nicer, and I don't have to go crazy with trying to align everything. Let's go in a little bit. Hey, that's pretty good, actually. I don't know about you, but I think that's pretty good. I think I might go with that. I think that's pretty nice. Let's group that together. And I think that'll work. I mean, it's not the nicest design I've ever seen, but I think that'll work. Now, I have a couple of different options here for how we can connect these together, right? So one thing I can do is just use my alignment tool. Just go back to our home view for a second here. And we can align this center. And then basically connect this together like so. And I have to make sure it doesn't. So that will probably work. The other thing I could also do is I can angle it very slightly, but I think I'm going to leave it flat. I think I'm going to leave it flat, and that should be fine. Okay. I think that looks like an elephant's trunk. Looks like an elephant. That's pretty funny. That was totally an accident. I think that's good. I think I'm going to leave it like that, and we'll print this and test it as is. That's so funny. It looks just like an elephant. Should make these rounded and make it look like elephant ears. That would be too funny. So I think this is done. I think this is ready to print. Now, you know, after building this in hindsight, there's a couple of things I probably would have done differently. One is, without a doubt, I should have known all of my dimensions before I started doing this. Two is I should have had the nuts and bolts that I was going to use so I could measure those precisely, as well as the set of headphones, so I could make sure that all the dimensions were correct. At least I did have the monitor clamp, but I really should have had everything together. The other thing that I probably should have done is sketch out a couple of different ideas for what I want this hook to look like. I don't really love this. I think we could do something much better if I had put a little bit more thought into it, but I really hadn't put any thought into that. So I really should have gone into this with a little bit more of a plan. I think the clamp itself came out really nice. I'm really happy with that. I think it will work quite well. But the hook part Not in love with it. I think what I really should have done was given a slight radius to the top here. In fact, I can do that really quickly. Why don't we do that just to make this a little bit nicer looking. So let's grab a round roof here. I'm going to scale this to, first of all, I'm going to center everything. And I'm going to make this a little smaller. Let's make it 19. My typing skills are a little off today. You ever have days like that where like you feel like you're one key off all the time on the keyboard? So, okay, so that fits pretty nicely. Now I'm going to just make this a little bit flatter. There we go. And then we can stick this here. And to here. And now when we group this together, now there's just a slight radius, because the head of the headphones is slightly curved. So now there's a slight radius, so that will sit a little bit nicer. I think that's a little better. I still don't love this design. I think we could probably do a better job with a little bit more thought put into this, but at the very least the headphones will sit on here and they won't slide off because of the little ball on the end. And it does still kind of look like an elephant, which was pretty funny. So anyway, just to stress that, you really should, you know, if you're making something that has some kind of function, it'd be a good idea to make some sketches. The other thing that would have worked nicely was to build a little lo-fi prototype with a little bit of Play-Doh or you know, some cardboard or something like that. So that way I could like test out a couple of the design ideas before I sink a bunch of time into modeling something and then realizing that I don't really like it. So I should have been a little bit more prepared, but you know, that being said, I think, you know, we were able to use resources online to find the dimensions of the bolt. So I feel pretty confident that that will work properly. You know, and I think all in all this will function well. I probably will have to make some tweaks to some of the dimensions. Oh, one other thing that I definitely should have done is, this is one object. I really should have modeled each of these to be separate pieces because it would be much more effective to 3D print them with the fins facing down versus facing up. Because of the way that this is designed, I probably will have to use some supports to fill this in. I would probably print it without it first and see how it came out, but it might become a little misshapen. Whereas if I was to print that flat, it would be printing everything upwards, so it would print a little bit more nicely. I honestly think this should print okay. The holes might be a little misshapen, but you know, we can just drill those out if they don't fit properly. So that was another thing in making this. I really should have made them as two separate pieces, but you know, so be it. This really does look like an elephant. It's so funny. I'm going to call it the elephant's trunk headphone clip or whatever, headphone hook. At any rate, I'll stop rambling. I think this was a pretty good design. It's always a good learning experience to try and model something new. One of the most fun parts for me about creating an object like this is the problem solving. Right? I really didn't know thoroughly what I was doing, so I have to kind of think on the fly and problem solve a little bit. You know, use TinkerCAD's tools to kind of figure out what we're doing. But all in all, I think it looks pretty good, and I hope you learned something. I hope this gives you a little bit of motivation to jump in and try and start designing some parts with function on your own. You know, it's a little bit overwhelming at first to, you know, try to think about how the mechanisms are going to work when you're making something, especially something with multiple pieces like this. But, you know, if it doesn't come out right the first time, you can always go back and change it, and you should never be afraid to take a stab at designing something. And you know, I think that's one of the best parts about TinkerCAD is it is a CAD program. So while it's great for modeling fun things like a castle, it's really designed to make parts that fit together and have function. And so I highly recommend seeing if you can come up with a project like this that you'd like to try out and jump into TinkerCAD and keep going. So thanks so much for tuning in. I appreciate it as always. And we'll see what our next project is going to be in TinkerCAD, and hope you have a great day, and I hope to see you this afternoon in this afternoon stream. See you later.